What is the vibe like down at Red Sox Spring Training, and what will the Red Sox rotation look like if Brian Bayo and Garrett Whitlock aren't ready for opening day?
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into Locked On Red Sox podcast, and thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I am your host, Jake Ignaszewski, and today we were joined by Red Sox beat reporter from The Athletic, Jen McCaffrey, and she answers all the biggest questions going into the Red Sox 2023 season, even touching on some of the injury updates of Garrett Whitlock, maybe not ready for opening day, speaks about Brian Bayo's progression, getting back to being healthy, and also touches on what the Red Sox rotation could look like without both of those players. Then also, touches on what will happen with Jarren Duran and Bobby Dalbec. But I'm not going to tell you everything that we talked about. You're going to have to listen to the great conversation that her and I had. But let's tune into it now. I'm here with Red Sox beat reporter Jen McCaffrey from The Athletic. So how are we doing today, Jen?
All right. How about you?
I'm doing great. It's been fun to watch, the energy sort of overanalyze the Red Sox spring training thus far. Only a few weeks in or so, few games under their belt. But from your time down there in Fort Myers, I was curious, sort of the energy and vibe that you observed from the team's chemistry thus far.
Yeah, it's definitely a different group, a lot of different guys, and I think you can kind of feel that. There's a different, there's just a different vibe in camp. Since so many, veteran guys left over the offseason or, were traded at the end of last year. So I think it was a camp and it still is a camp of guys getting to know each other and also sort of on the fly too, because WBC is going to be coming up pretty soon and kind of interfering with that. So I think guys are trying to get to know each other quicker too, because they know some of them are going to be leaving and it's going to interfere a little bit with things. So, yeah, I mean, Alex Cora talked a lot about just professionalism in camp and guys trying to just going about their business and doing things the way he likes to see them done. And not that it ever wasn't professional in the past, but I think just given how much attention this offseason got and how much turnover the roster was going to have, I think he's been pleased with how the guys have handled it and how they've been able to kind of, yeah, just block out a lot of the maybe the distractions that come with kind of having this new face on this new team.
I agree, and it really seems like we saw the mariachi band, today with Alex Verdugo, Jarren Duran, and you brought up the WBC. Obviously, we're going to see Kike Hernandez, Yoshida, Doogie, obviously Duran, and a few other players go over there. But I also saw something today about Garrett Whitlock as well from Alex Cora saying that there could be a possibility that he wouldn't be ready for opening day, and was curious sort of why you think that is. Maybe it's due to the lack of him progressing as far as they would like him to and sort of his hip recovery.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And kind of even going back into the earlier in the offseason, there were hints that, he was slightly behind, but they weren't worried, that he was just taking his progression slowly. And I kind of had in the back of my mind all along that maybe, Whitlock might not be ready for the start of the season just because it seemed like he wasn't on the same schedule as a lot of the other guys. He was throwing bullpens early in camp, but he wasn't doing like the PFP drills and things like that. I think I talked to Dave Bush about that, and he said that's kind of the last thing they bring along. But I think they're trying to be extra careful here, just knowing obviously how important the hip is and to the longevity of the player himself. And obviously it's not an arm injury, but just given how young he is and how important he is to the team, I think they just want to take their time. And it might not even be something where he misses, a long stretch of time, but maybe if
Mhm.
he's just a couple weeks behind, misses the first couple weeks, that might be, the case. So I think it's early. It's not even March yet, so I think we have some time here to obviously monitor the situation and figure out more of where he's at. But I don't think it's anything overly alarming. I think they're just trying to be careful, just knowing how many guys had injuries last year. This injury in particular for Whitlock, took a lot out of him. So I think just that building back up is just going to be key for him, and they want to make sure they do it the right way so they don't set him back before he even gets back out there.
Yeah, and I agree, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. From my assessment, I think that a lot of his hip injury or main reason why he had to have surgery was because he wasn't able to work up to being a starter, and he was sort of thrown into that. Would you semi agree or?
Yeah, no, I think that certainly played into it, kind of the back and forth of, starting, relieving, and kind of building back up. He talked a lot too about just that 5-day routine last year and trying to get back into that after, starting the season as a reliever. So
Mhm.
I think that definitely played into things, and maybe he kind of rushed into some habits with his delivery, as he was trying to build up as a starter that kind of compromised the hip a little bit. And so trying to maybe unlearn a lot of those things. He did a ton of physical therapy this offseason, but still it's a different thing when you're back out there on the mound and in a game. So I think again, yeah, they're just trying to take it extra careful and make sure they go about it the right way with him.
That makes sense. And, in my mind, there's like seven starting pitchers right now in terms of the Red Sox depth chart. And, the two guys that are sort of on the outside that don't, in my opinion, have solidified spots, James Paxton, Tanner Houck. And I'm curious if Whitlock was to miss, let's say, 2 weeks starting the season, who do you think would be more likely to fill in that, that fifth spot or to be that fifth pitcher in the rotation?
I mean, I guess it all depend on how these guys, pitch and feel over the course of the next month or so, and making sure none of those guys, have setbacks or nobody else. I know we've also heard of, Nick Pivetta with, having COVID and being a
Right.
little bit behind. So you're never quite sure. But if everybody's healthy and it does come down, to a couple guys, I mean, I think Paxton has the edge, just having been a veteran guy that's sort of worked his way back all this, this stretch. He's never pitched out of the bullpen, whereas Houck
Hmm.
has. So I think they like that Houck can have that flexibility to do both, and probably would prefer to keep him in one role. But I think just given Paxton's, the fact that he's been in the league for such a long time and he's never been a reliever, I think he'll probably end up in the rotation. But yeah, kind of they have a lot of moving parts right now with this rotation, so they kind of have a lot of things to watch over the next month, and a lot of just guys to monitor too, to make sure that even Brian Bayo, with his kind of forearm strain too, is he gonna be able to be ready by the start of the season too? It seems
Right.
like he will be, but that's another guy you want to keep an eye on, and then obviously Chris Sale. So I mean, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of moving parts, and I think they're just gonna try to be extra careful with guys over these next several weeks here.
And Paxton's a guy that I'm most intrigued to see on the mound, just in a Red Sox uniform, since he hasn't really pitched healthy in 2 to 3 years or so. But what have you really heard on in terms of him? Do you think that they're going to work him up to being a starter a little bit slower than some other guys, and maybe start him as a long reliever or something like that?
No, I think they're gonna kind of put him right into, trying to be a starter. He's
Okay.
scheduled to start a game later this week. I don't know if it's Wednesday or Thursday. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think they're gonna kind of stretch him out, as a starter, and kind of be in that role. But again, things might change. But he's, been along doing, all the drills and kind of bullpens along with everybody else. So it seems like he's kind of coming along just as well as they expected. There's kind of been no restrictions or anything. He says he's feeling good, and obviously it doesn't have a ton of just coming off the injury and Tommy John last year, and that first outing he had coming back, he hurt himself with that lat strain, so he hasn't had a lot of innings, and a lot of time against batters. But I think they can build that kind of stuff into backfield sessions and things like that, or
Makes
what
sense.
have you, over the course of the next 6 weeks or so. But yeah, I mean, given that he's going to be appearing in a game later this week, I think and probably definitely ahead of Sale, ahead of Whitlock, even Bayo. So I mean, that's even Pavetta. I don't think Pavetta will be in a game yet either. I think Kluber's probably the only one of that kind of group there that will have thrown a start in a League game, aside from Paxton. So I think that's a good side for him if he's hoping to make the rotation here. So.
That makes sense. And you also brought up Bayo, and I think something that you said earlier too is a great point as well. We're a month away from opening day even being here, and it's tough to not overanalyze some of these injuries and think, Whitlock, Bayo, could they not be in the rotation starting off in opening day? But if that is the case for Bayo, do you think that they could potentially start him out in AAA to work him back up to be able to be healthy on the major league roster?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's certainly a possibility to just kind of if he's only been able to get maybe, three or so starts by the end of spring training, if they're taking him along that slowly, then yeah, I don't think they're gonna want to throw him right into major league games after just a couple of spring training starts. So I could see him starting out in AAA if that's the case. I think he'll spend, a bulk of the season in the majors, but if he hasn't progressed enough to where he can, have had at least 4 or 5 starts by the end of camp, then yeah, it's possible he starts out there and see where he goes. I think he threw a bullpen yesterday of 20 pitches. So I mean, he's throwing on bullpens. It's not like he's not doing anything, so that's good.
Hmm.
He'll probably need to throw at least another bullpen or two, and then he'll do that progression where he'll face, he'll do the up downs maybe once or twice, and then maybe a live batting practice, and then a game. So he's probably, if things go well, he's probably a couple weeks out from a game at this point. So we'll see kind of where that puts him towards the end of camp. But yeah, obviously, you don't want to rush him either because again, he's another piece that's going to be a big, big part of the rotation this year, but also for the future.
Right, and sticking on the pitching side, one thing that we haven't seen the Red Sox have in, five some odd years is some good young pitching depth. And we really saw them flash that yesterday with, Winkowski, Walter, Chris Murphy, Brian Mata. And I'm curious, we saw, Cutter Crawford break the 26-man roster out of nowhere last year at the end of spring training. I was wondering if there's anybody in your mind that you could see potentially find a way to make that jump or sneak into that 26-man roster like Crawford did last year.
Yeah, honestly, any of those guys feel like they could, be in the mix there. They definitely have, and I feel like they've talked a lot about the team in general of just feeling like they have a lot more depth, not only with that group of guys coming up, but also with guys like Winkowski and Crawford having had the experiences they did last year, and just kind of knowing the league a little bit, and just kind of knowing what to expect. So I mean, yeah, any of those guys, could definitely be in the mix there. I think we'll have to see a little bit more of them to figure out, who might work where and best, and again, what the rotation looks like at the end of camp and what kind of holes they have. But I don't think it's, far fetched at all to say that any of those guys, are off the table or anything. I think the pitching staff is. There are definitely some people that you consider locks, but you never know how injuries are going to come about, and so I think it's pretty fluid at this point in terms of who's gonna make the team here, and which of those guys might kind of rise to the top over the next several weeks.
I hope that you are enjoying my conversation with Jen McCaffrey so far, but I just want to take a second to talk to you about Built Bar. So, if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, you have to try Built Bar. You've heard Lauren and I talk about it for months and years, and it's honestly one of my favorite things to eat, to not only be able to eat healthy but also be able to fill up when I'm on the run. And the most amazing part about it is that it's not only good for you but it actually tastes good. It's 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they have unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. It's pretty much like a candy bar, but it's a protein bar and actually good for you. It only has 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And they're honestly one of the best tasting protein bars that I've ever had. And it not only tastes good, but it's also so healthy for you and really fills you up really anytime throughout the day, whether you're, going to the gym, on the run, at work, whatever it is. Built Bar is always great for a snack throughout the day. And now you don't have to wait around to get a box of Built Bar. And for years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart and Sam's Club and don't have to wait around for the box to come to you. You can go and get them. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. And if you don't have a Sam's Club or Walmart near you, you can still go and order your Built Bars at built.com. So go over and check them out either at Walmart, Sam's Club, or Built.com. Now let's get back into my conversation with Jen McCaffrey. Right. And, Brandon Walter, what one guy that really flashed his stuff yesterday, only 7 pitches, striking out 2 batters. Curious to see, if his neck injury, forces him, I guess, to spend some more time in AAA since he only was able to make 2 starts there last year. But, one, 2 guys that I'm very curious and intrigued to see if they start either on the major league roster or in Worcester is Jarren Duran and Bobby Dalbec. They're 2 guys, we heard throughout the offseason. We're talked about in trade rumors. Obviously nothing has really been spoken about on that front over the last few weeks or months. And we've seen them being talked about getting a lot more time, at least Dalbec specifically, having reps at all these different positions throughout spring training. Obviously, Duran's going to the WBC, but where could you potentially see them begin the season? Worcester or Boston?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely both, could be, bench options for the team by the end of camp. As a Dahlbeck, a backup first baseman, or Duran with the speed that he has and these new rules that are in place. That's obviously going to be key in the outfield depth there. So I mean, Cora's talked a lot about how basically just wanting to give them both really a second chance to kind of show that they can stick and show that they what they can do. Obviously, Dalbec has done it a little bit, but still has a lot to prove consistency wise, and has shown flashes of what he can do. And Duran, had that opportunity last year, but Cora talked a lot about just not feeling. Or feeling like he kind of put Duran in a tough spot to kind of take over for Kike Hernandez in the leadoff spot and in center, and kind of put a lot of pressure on him. So, yeah, I think if both have a good camp, there's definitely a chance both could be on the major league roster. But the good thing is that they both have options and they can be stashed in Worcester. And I honestly wouldn't rule out, other teams also have, injuries that crop up over the course of spring that, maybe a trade happens too. So I think they're trying to keep all their options open. But yeah, it's I think anything's kind of on the table at this point, and we'll kind of see how things shake out and how they perform, and yeah, where they stand in a couple weeks.
And makes it even tougher for Duran with, Tapia right in front of him too. Them sort of battling it out. Obviously Duran and him will exactly be able to compete within spring training with Duran and playing for Mexico. But how do you think that Tapia could play into this factor? And it's also just a little bit funny with, the situation that happened last year with Tapia and Duran, that now they're on the same team competing against each other.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Tapia probably, figures into that depth, kind of role as well. I mean, you've got Rob Refsnyder, who's probably going to be your fourth outfielder.
Right.
So I mean, you kind of getting tight there with, adding another outfielder, or kind of what you feel you need by the end of camp. But yeah, I mean, he's obviously a really good player, and I think they realized last year they just didn't have enough depth across the board. So if there were opportunities to add guys that had success in the majors, then why not? And kind of figure out how this all shakes out in the end. And having more guys is better than not having enough. And I
Hmm.
think obviously that was a huge part of the reason why they failed so much last year. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be position battles. There's going to be guys that need to impress, and guys that need to kind of rise to the top. And and they also aren't going to read too much, into spring training numbers either. You don't want to
Right.
just, we've seen so many guys over the years that have had terrific springs and then fall apart when the season starts,
Yeah.
or who have, bad springs and then figure it out and have, decent seasons. So, there's also, the trap of kind of reading too much into
Hmm.
spring numbers. I think it's just more about, yeah, consistency and kind of track records, and honestly just what the team needs, and where the holes in the roster are, and kind of going from there. But yeah, Tapia is definitely going to be getting plenty of playing time too, with some of these guys, yeah, headed out for the WBC.
Makes sense. I actually looked at Dalbec's spring training numbers a few days ago, and he was on pace for 50 home runs and like 150 at
Yeah.
bats. But yeah, that's one thing that's always fun with spring training. It's tough to not overanalyze. It's tough to not get excited, but all that really matters is what happens in the real games, the regular season games. But another thing that was a whole fiasco throughout this weekend was the pitch clock. And one thing that specifically with Rafael Devers over the last few years, and JD sort of made this sort of a routine throughout his time in Boston was their breathing exercises, the deep breath right before they start their at bat. And I'm curious, specifically on that, but also just other guys like pre up at bat routines. I'm curious if there's anything that you've heard from people on how they're trying to adapt to the more speeded up sort of game with the pitch clock.
Yeah, I think we've focused so much on, the pitchers and how it's going to be an adjustment for the pitchers, but we haven't really, focused too much on the batters and kind of the time they take trying to get in the box and, their routines and kind of getting used to that. And obviously saw it come to a head in that in the game against, the Braves, in the 8 seconds that they have to get in the box and the game getting called on a third strike. So yeah, the batters are going to have to readjust their routines. I haven't talked to specifically to Devers or any of those guys. I wrote a story a few years ago about Devers' breathing routine and kind of the big deep breath that he takes in between pitches. Obviously he's not going to be able to do that as much. Or if he does, he'll have to kind of quick it up a little bit. But yeah, guys are gonna just have to like readjust and kind of find new routines. But the pitchers are too. So I think it's kind of on both ends. Guys are gonna have to change, routines a little bit and figure out, what works for them. And that's kind of why I think in some of these games you'll notice guys trying some things a little differently. Like you'll hear, on the sidelines if Tom Caron's interviewing a pitcher after he's gotten called out of the game, you'll hear him talk about just trying to push himself, pitch a little quicker than he needs to just to test himself. These are practice games. So these guys are going to be
Right.
trying different things to see, can I get away with this? Like how many seconds do I have left? Can I take this deep breath and still have time? Maybe I can. Or maybe, I need to, do things a little quicker. So I think you'll see guys maybe trying just some different things so that before the real games do start and just kind of like yeah practice this is what this is for, what is spring training is for, is just
Right.
practice games. So if they mess up, then it's not the end of the world, and it's kind of the time that they take and can use to just get used to these new rules.
And I think that's one thing. Lauren and I talked about it yesterday, especially after the whole reaction happened of the ultimate Braves and Red Sox game ending like that. That these guys have these subconscious sort of routines, and it's at this point where they don't even think about it anymore. But now they not only have to think about that routine, have the clock in the back of their mind, but also focus on a 95 mile per hour pitch coming at them. But it's going to be an adjustment not only for obviously the fans, but for the players and everything like that. But the last thing that I have for you is, for myself, and I bet a lot of other fans, up here in New England are just able to sort of get a glimpse of what Red Sox spring training has been like thus far, only through the screens of just what the Red Sox are posting, or people like yourself and other beat reporters that are down there are sort of posting of everything down there. But I was curious, if is there anything while you were down there? Obviously, you probably like went down with some storylines in your mind of things maybe to look out for. But is there anything that sort of surprised you while you were in Fort Myers?
um I think just yeah, I mean, I think, as kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning, just all the changes, it definitely looks and feels like a different clubhouse, not in a good or bad way. It just, it was so similar for so many years, with
Mm,
JD and Xander and Christian Vasquez and Nathan Avaldi and it's not a good or a bad thing that, there were so many guys there for so long, but it just, you gotta get used to so many people around, and it felt different. A different group of guys, even with Sale being around because he hasn't been around as much. And, Paxton's been on this team this is going on his second year, but we never saw him
right.
because he was rehabbing all last year. So, and just an influx of the young talent, the guys like Cedar Rafaela in the corner of the clubhouse, even Tristan Casas, and just having, those guys around too. So it felt like, things were good. I was down there for the first, week or so. I go back in a couple weeks for about another week. So I'm curious to see, that was down there for the first week. So it was really kind of everybody kind of getting to know each other. I'm curious to
Mhm.
see how it is. Will be in a few weeks once they have gotten to know each other a little bit. But yeah, it just kind of felt fresh, like kind of a new chapter. And just I'm curious, after such a um long off season in a lot of ways with so much change and so much I think frustration from fans in a lot of different areas, how they'll receive this team. I think people are just anticipating them to be bad, and if they're good, or even if they're mediocre, I'm curious to see um, if people, if more people than just the diehards will care, or if it's just
Right.
going to be similar to, similar to most years. I feel like when, everyone waits until, or, the casual fans wait until Bruins and, Celtics are out of the playoffs, which this year could be pretty, well into June.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm just really curious to see how this team kind of actually performs on the field, because it does feel like there are some interesting players here that could be that could do something, I think they have a big chip on their shoulder, and I think a few of them have talked about that. And I think, given that they're, a pretty veteran clubhouse, they know how to use that chip on their shoulder to perform, and I think a lot of these guys have a lot of pride. So, having read and heard a lot of the negativity around the team entering the year, I'm just really curious to see how they're actually going to put it together, or if it's going to fall into what, a lot of people are projecting it to be, where, a mediocre team that doesn't live up to, what it should be. So
Right.
yeah, it's just definitely feels like a lot of new faces, and that's kind of the biggest thing I think that stood out early on.
That makes sense. And that's one thing that Lauren and I have talked about throughout the offseason. The two words that we've used more than anything is potential and what if. There's just so much potential in what ifs, but it's just all about like it's to know how it's all going to work out on the field, and the record wise, and how what questions will be answered. And I bet you got the same exact thing throughout the offseason of people just asking you, like, what are the Red Sox doing? And so hopefully the team ultimately, through their performance, can answer those questions of why Chaim Bloom made the decisions that he did. But really appreciate you taking the time, Jen, and for giving all of your insight. And you're somebody that I've always admired your work, and the great articles that you put out. And so for anybody that wants to tune into stuff that you put out and be able to be as knowledgeable and prepared for the season to come, where can they find all that stuff?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, theathletic.com, where's all our Red Sox coverage, on Twitter at JC McCaffrey. And yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Red Sox beat reporter from The Athletic, Jen McCaffrey. But we're going to continue to do interviews like this with experts like Jen, as well as bring on some fans to give you multiple different perspectives to help you get great Red Sox content leading up to the season. If you want to hear updates about the Red Sox 5 days a week, go over and subscribe to Locked On Red Sox over on YouTube or whatever audio platform that you listen to, so then you get updated when new episodes drop. We post Monday through Friday, and we try and do episodes like this with different guests, bring up different updates, like I mentioned, or touch on some of the biggest storylines that are going on surrounding the team. Also, make sure to follow us over on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox to get all those updates immediately, and also to try and get involved in each and every single episode that we post. One thing that Lauren and I try to do is make this the most fan engaging Red Sox podcast that there is out there. So if we have a guest on like Jen, or if we're just talking about a regular storyline or topic, we try and get your guys' opinions involved in each and every single episode. Also, make sure to follow myself on Twitter. It's at Jake Iggy, and also my co-host Lauren. It's three laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But we greatly appreciate everybody tuning in to the Locked On Red Sox podcast and making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. It's also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Also, make sure to tune into some of the other great Locked On podcasts out there, like Locked On Orioles, Locked On Mariners. They have them for the MLB, NBA, NFL, everything that you can imagine, 5 days a week to keep you updated about some of your favorite teams in all of sports. But we greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. As always, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll end it how we always end it. Let's go Sox.